But men and women, Aristotle, there were 13. Now it's up to 49 they've discovered. Well, with the New Testament, just the New Testament, in the new evidence that demands a verdict, I have now been able to document 24,633 manuscripts of just the New Testament. I never even knew they existed until I set out to make a joke of it. And later, I found out the joke was on me. I had not done my homework. Now, let me show you how unique that 24,633 is. Is there any of you here that know the number 2 book in manuscript authority in all of history? The New Testament's number 1. Any of you know the number 2 book in all history in manuscript authority? The Iliad by Homer. 643 manuscripts. That's number 2 in all history. And yet it's interesting, to this day, I've yet to find a teacher or a professor that knew that. I didn't even know it until I set out to make a joke of it. Just number-wise, there is more evidence to examine than any 10 pieces of classical and literature of antiquity put together. But now, you can do this. Take every Bible and destroy it. Take every manuscript and burn it. Destroy every manuscript. Destroy every Bible. And within 150 to 250, 300 years of Christ, closer than any other literature of antiquity, I can reconstruct all but 11 verses of the entire New Testament. You say, no, wait a minute. Without any manuscripts? Without anybody? Yeah. Throw them all away and burn them. And I can go back within 150 to 300 years and reconstruct. So how do you do that? I discovered that the early church fathers, when they would write letters to the churches, or they would give sermons, they would write out and copy quotes out of the scriptures. Well, just like I do. I will copy sometimes a half chapter out through my notes. And sometimes they would copy 3, 4, 5 chapters of the scriptures in corresponding with the churches. And I've now been able to document 86,429 quotations from just the early church fathers. And taking these 86,400 some quotations, you can, without any Bible's manuscript or anything, you can reconstruct all but 11 verses. But I never knew that until I set out to make a joke of it. And I found out later, boy, the joke was on me. That even to recreate much of the original, you don't even have to have a Bible or a transcript. And that is mind-blowing to me. And so, time-wise and number-wise, the Bible stands alone. No, it doesn't mean it's true. But I think it does mean this, that what we have today is what was written down. Whether what was written down was true or not, but it is what was written down. Now the second question. Was what was written down true? Did Jesus do that? Did he say this? Is this a true rendering of what Christ said and what he did?
I would say parts of it. I don't think it's, again, I think it's all based on things that, based on what had happened, but I don't know if it's actually word for word is exactly what went on. I think it's just somebody's telling a story.
It could be changed at any time, from history to even fiction, like make-believe, and it could be any one of those that they choose.
I don't know. It's a good question. How does one define or ascertain whether something written over the course of centuries is in fact what was intended to be written from the onset?
I mean, I know for me, if I read the Bible, I follow it how I interpret it. So if I think something about it isn't right, then I'm not going to follow that part of
it. There's several lines of argument that I want to share along that. The first is the writers of the New Testament. They wrote as eyewitnesses, or they recorded eyewitness accounts. You say, what? They wrote as eyewitnesses, Or, like Luke, they recorded eyewitness accounts. I believe Matthew, Mark, and John are eyewitnesses. Luke is not. Luke recorded eyewitness accounts for Theophilus. And see, what they did in those days is often a man would hire a scribe, a scholar, a researcher to research out, well, just like people do today. And it looks like Theophilus had hired Luke to study everything carefully that had happened. And Luke starts out his gospel by saying, I have examined everything carefully from the beginning, from those who are eyewitnesses, to present to you the exact truth of the things taught among us. So Luke did not write as an eyewitness, but he did record eyewitness accounts. One of the most critical tests for me is the eyewitness. I mean, here in the New Testament time, the community was the most powerful force to determine truth. Because you see, there were so many people alive who knew Jesus when this was all recorded and written. They knew what he said, they knew where he went, what he did. And if they would have ever dared to have added or to have taken away, there were antagonistic people right there at that time to correct them. And then also, coming, to the book of Mark, a lot of people say, well, you can't consider Mark an eyewitness, even though he recorded eyewitness accounts. And they said, but Mark wasn't an eyewitness when he wrote the Gospel of Mark. He recorded what Peter said. And there's secular sources, apart from the Bible, that would confirm that Mark was the recorder of what Peter said. And see, that was done all the time in olden days, and even like now, is in the olden days, they would often have a writer, a scribe, a recorder, that would take down the person's memory and what he shared, and then that would become his work. But recently a book came out on eyewitness to Jesus, and it was written by an attorney, and she clearly documented, according to the laws of legal evidence, that Mark would be considered an eyewitness account because he had recorded, he was simply the recorder of the eyewitness, which was Peter. And so the eyewitness is a powerful determinant of truth. For example, in 1 John 1:3, in the New Testament, the Apostle John says, what our eyes have seen, what our ears have heard, what our hands have handled, we declare unto you about Jesus Christ. Well, you can't get much closer to this situation. And then in 2 Peter 1:16, Peter is talking to the Jewish audience. And he said, we did not follow cleverly devised tales. It's interesting today how many people will say to me, and many of them are very sincere, they'll say, back then they couldn't discern the difference between tales and truth. They couldn't discern the difference between fact and fiction. Well, let me tell you, I'll put any of them up against any professor today or any historian today. They knew the difference between truth and tales. They went out and died for it. And Peter starts out here and says, we did not follow cleverly devised tales. They knew the difference between tales and truth, and fact and fiction. But we were eyewitnesses. We were eyewitnesses. They wrote as eyewitnesses. And then in John 20, verses 30 to 31, John says, many other things, many other signs Jesus performed. Now, why did he do signs? He did signs to convince people that he was from the Father, that he was the Messiah, the Son of God. And it says many other signs Jesus did that convinced people then that he was a Messiah. And John writes, they have not even been recorded. But then the next verse says, but these things have been written. In other words, these signs have been recorded that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, and in believing, have eternal life.
I don't think it will be, it's a matter of proving something. I think it's a matter of believing and feeling. That's what I feel. I learned to do this way, and I have questioned that.